Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Riding with the Wave. I'm Mark Healey, the editor-in-chief of The Wave, Rockaway's newspaper since 1893. And joining me today on the podcast is Felicia Singh. Felicia is running for District 32's City Council seat. She's running in a Democratic primary, which I believe is June 22nd of this coming year. And she joins us today. Welcome to the program there, Felicia.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to share my story and why I'm running.
So I'm glad that you brought that up, your story, because, every candidate has a story. Every candidate, I think sometimes when the story is really, kind of like yours, where, you're born in Queens, you live in Queens, you work in Queens. Talk a little bit about your background and why you decided to run for this seat.
Absolutely. So I lived in Ozone Park my entire life. And really, my story stems from my home. My parents I grew up in an interfaith and intercultural home. And both of my parents are service workers. My dad is a taxi driver. He has been my whole life. And my mom is a school bus matron. So she drives, helps assist picking up children and dropping them off to school and home, children who have disabilities. And both my parents, being immigrants, have always taught me that knowledge is power and I must use it to do good. And so I've always used that. I've always had that pillar ingrained in who I am and what I do. And that's why I became an educator. Teachers have been a huge pinnacle of my story in my life. And teaching has been the greatest honor. Being an educator for the last 10 years has been the greatest honor of my life. And really, what it's taught me is that children, no matter where they go to school or where they come from or what their circumstances, deserve and have a right to love and a fully funded education with the resources that they need to be successful in this world, whatever success means to them. And I decided to run for office because I realized that our work shouldn't cost us our lives or our livelihood. But in New York City, it does. It does for our most working class communities. It does for people who don't qualify for stimulus checks and are undocumented. And it does for so many other marginalized groups. And what we're missing in City Council are people who not just advocate and talk about issues, but actually experience them and experience systems that don't and have never worked for people, because those are the people who know exactly what to change about our systems. And that's why I'm running.
So when I think about, for the last 11 years, Eric Ulrich has held a seat, and he's a Republican. And, some people, and again, this is just one of those observations. Some people like the idea of having somebody from the other side of the aisle in a Democratic, Democrat Party dominated city council, liked the idea of having someone, from the other side who was, let's be honest, Eric is pretty much a moderate. He's not really a conservative. How do you balance that? As someone as running as a Democrat, where the seat, as I said, hasn't been in the other party's hands for 11 years. As a Democrat, not only right now, obviously you're running against the other Democrats, but how do you separate yourself from the field? To say, why should people vote for Felicia Singh instead of, let's say, Mike Scala for that matter?
Yeah, not all Democrats are the same. Just like not all Republicans are the same, not all people are the same. And so my values are deeply, deeply linked in my work as an educator, my work as someone who's done volunteer service throughout our entire district and in neighboring districts, and my work as an advocate, and someone who really centers our working class communities. So what makes me different as an individual is that I not only am talking about being a working class community member, but I'm also experiencing systems that literally don't work for people like us, like this entire district. This district is divided in so many capacities in regards to like socioeconomic differences and jobs and welfare. Our access to transportation looks different throughout the district as well. And so we need people who have the literal experience navigating all of these different systems of transportation, of education, of debt, of housing crisis. And these are all experiences that I come to the table having had gone through and still go through. Being a Democrat to me means, and the type of Democrat that I am, and the type of person that I am, is someone who's going to center justice and really center our most marginalized and vulnerable people throughout this district. That's what makes me different. That's what makes my work and my lens and the way I look at policy as being very, very intersectional. I understand that the trials and tribulations we have in our district in regards to transportation impact how the food availability we have in the district. It impacts how we get to work. It impacts the schools, resources, everything impacts each other. And I think we need a candidate who understands that intersectionality plays a large role in the resources we have or we don't have in this district.
So obviously, we just learned yesterday that Selvina Powers Brooks, excuse me, she won with the ranked choice voting. She wound up getting the 50%, the 50% that, based on the votes that were counted afterwards. And, it was interesting because the ranked choice voting didn't seem to take as long as we initially thought. I mean, there was absentee votes that had to be counted. And do you think that ranked choice, are you in support of ranked choice voting? And in this particular instance, obviously with Selvina winning and it not taking as long as we initially thought, would you say that ranked choice voting is a success, and is it something that you support for your candidacy?
In New York City, we voted for ranked choice voting. It's a new idea, it's a new system, and it's one that I think the implementation and the effectiveness should be led by Campaign Finance Board and the New York City Board of Elections. Have they done a good job in making sure communities are educated and well informed about ranked choice voting? I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think candidates leaving ranked choice voting education up to candidates can create a lot of nuance, because we have some candidates who do something called bullet voting, where they just tell people to vote for them and no one else. And so ranked choice voting cannot be effective in spaces where some people are enacting it and saying, hey, put me as your number one, your number two, or your number three if you have another candidate that you like. Whereas some candidates are saying, just vote for me, and I don't believe that it exists. And what candidates add to that is confusion, misinformation, and then you kind of go against a voting system that was created to create more parity in city council representation. We need more women of color in city council. There is no South Asian, zero South Asian elected official in city council. Yet our community of District 32 and neighboring communities have a large population of South Asians. So ranked choice voting needs to be used effectively. We need to start educating our communities at all levels through civic associations, block associations, CFB, New York City Board of Elections, to really make sure that we are practicing what we voted into our system, our policy, our law. So I really want to see ranked choice voting used to its most effective capacity. I believe that it will help us elect, as we saw in District 31, more women of color, more people of color, more immigrants. That's what we need in our city to really make sure we have representative voices in our legislative body. And that's what I'm doing as a candidate. I'm making sure that every single person I talk to, whether they're voting for me or vote number one or number two, know exactly what they're going to see when they go into the ballot on June 22nd.
So the Rockaway vote is pretty important, I think, to the District 32 candidate. And, it's also a pretty tough place to, I think, convince the peninsula as a whole to vote for you. And I'm not just saying you, I'm just saying if you're a candidate and you're running for office, And I've been at the Wave now for 7 years. So I've seen candidates, I've seen them come, I've seen them go. I see how they handle Rockaway and I see how they don't, handle Rockaway. How do you feel, because I just know that having dealt with the Rockaway community on a regular basis, I know they really don't care about the rest of the Queens as much as, maybe some of the other parts of the district might. So how do you, like I said, that's a tough nut to crack sometimes, to convince folks from Rockaway to vote for you, how do you plan to crack that nut? How do you plan to, this is not, I obviously have heard your name before, long before this interview. Multiple people from the community have reached out and said, oh, have you interviewed Felicia yet? So, obviously you've made some impact on some folks here. But how do you, again, let me ask the question without sounding redundant. How do you, crack that tough nut of Rockaway to get that vote in the primary?
Yeah, couple of things. First, it's really ensuring that our community members in Rockaway feel seen and feel heard. So I've been doing most of my time in Rockaway, whether it's physically there or on Zoom meetings, have been as a listening block. And that's really important. People feel, as folks who live on the peninsula, they're the front line. They're the most vulnerable to climate change. They're the most vulnerable to impacts of flooding. And so really being a listening board is really important. And that's how I started really organizing and understanding the needs of folks who live on the peninsula. And that has made people feel really validated. Listening goes very far. And as an educator, that's something I practiced for 10 years of my life, listening to children and their needs. It's the same idea with community members. And then in that case, after you're listening, it's offering ideas, it's building plans with people, and it's showing up consistently. That's also really important. Yeah, I'm not from the peninsula, I'm from Ozone Park, but we're all from the same community. And what impacts the peninsula is going to impact Ozone Park and Howard Beach and Woodhaven, because our resources are so limited that it impacts all of us. And so secondly, when it comes to ranked choice voting, this is what makes it so important, is that folks who are a little hesitant on voting for me or might have different ideas about who I am, this is a great avenue to have conversations with people who might have otherwise written me off because I might be too quote unquote progressive, but really be like, okay, if you like X and X person's platform, that's great. I encourage you to vote for me number 2, vote for me number 3. And what we want people to feel is that power and that agency to vote for multiple people at the same time. There's power in that. That's real power in your vote. And so those are the 2 ways in which I'm meeting the folks on the peninsula and our community members, and really talking about what is it that they need and reaching out as much as I can. And that's been working. It's been really lovely, actually.
Another aspect of that tough nut to crack, and I hate to keep using that metaphor, but I think it's a perfect metaphor for certain parts of Rockaway. Obviously, you're dealing with not only a community that's made up of a lot of first responders, police, firemen, sanitation, people who are, when everybody else gets to, during the pandemic, when everybody else got to, shelter at home, they had to go to work. So, there's a different mindset there about, and not just the folks who are first responders, but also the people that support the first responder community. They are wary of progressives because they find that progressives tend to be less respectful. And again, this is the things I hear, not me defining anyone. That progressives don't value first responders as much as they should. That defunding the police is something that makes little sense for this kind of community. So how do you communicate your ability to lead as a member of the city council to that group of people that feel very strongly about and not just the job, right? Not just the jobs that these people have, but what it stands for. When we're talking about law-abiding citizens and people who are, want to feel safe, right?
Mhm.
How do you communicate to those folks? I mean, obviously you want to engage with them because you want their vote, but how do you, as you said, listen, but also communicate how you're going to be able to convince them to vote for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, layers there, Mark, that you bring up. And I guess I'll just work backwards. Really, because I think safety is, first of all, and I say this often in every public forum I've had, every recording that's out there possibly of me right now, is that safety's never really been something we've owned in a way that's like community based. I think that we are so reliant on first responders, or in regards to like NYPD law enforcement, in this way where what people need are different avenues for safety. And what that looks like is money, it's resources. And I think what I do in the conversation that I bring and the nuance that I bring to conversations is like, well, let's expand what safety means for people. Let's make it bigger, because right now the definition is right here in this circle. And what if safety also meant reallocating money in our city budget to fully fund our neighborhood schools? What if safety meant that now, the people who respond to mental health disturbances and domestic violence, which is rampant in South Queens, by the way, are actually social workers and care responders, as well as EMTs and EMS. So I think when I bring that nuance into conversations, people are like, "Oh, that makes sense. That is providing comfort to our neighbors." And so it's expanding what safety means. Number one. Number two, I understand that first responders are burnt out. The pandemic has caused them to literally be burnt out, be at risk of so many different things, even the COVID itself. And what makes me really sad is that our first responders, like our EMS workers, don't even get a chance in their contracts for a break, you know? And so really, how can we really honor our service workers? It's like paying EMS a livable wage. It's making sure that they're protected on the job by being given a break, a lunch break. They literally don't have one. They're really the first people to contact folks when they're at risk, but they don't even have an equitable living wage. And so that's the kind of advocacy work that I'm going to be doing in city council, because I'm seeing people work incredibly hard to respond to our neighbors and respond to calls, but then those same workers don't even get equitable living wage at their job. Um, so that's number two. And then number three, I understand that there's a huge misconception and there's a huge fear mongering that's happened around the word defund, and it's happened on both sides. And there's a huge miseducation about it as well. We have a lot of money in our New York City budget. It's not like we don't have money. We have it, Mark. It exists. How we're managing the budget is not centering justice. It's not centering people's money. It's not centering how we pay our taxes. It's an abuse of how we spend our money. It's misinformation. It really is neglectful for our communities and our children and our youth. And now we need to really look at our budget and be like, well, where are we wasting money? Where are we pouring too much money in? Where are we not putting money enough? Because when we take care of our homeless population, when we take care of our youth, when we take care of our folks who have mental health issues and are facing domestic violence, we're really taking care of everyone. And that's a whole new system, and it's a whole new way, and it's scary. Change is really hard. I understand that. But we are in a pinnacle time where we cannot go back. This pandemic has exacerbated the issues that have always existed. And now we're mad about them. And now we need to take the courage to step forward and change them. And you know what? No Democratic moderate is going to be able to do that. They haven't. You can't be in the middle and decide you want to create change. You have to step forward with courage. And the work that I want to do will allow for that to happen.
It's funny, when when I think about, um, these debates, and when people talk about, as you said, there's misconceptions on both sides, and I do think that is true. You know, I tend to be, a little jaded, myself, when it comes to people, not so much running for office, but in office, because I feel that I'm a person who shoots straight, and I don't make a lot of friends that way, but my job as a journalist is not about making friends. It's about getting to the truth or taking sides. It's really not about that. Friends are gravy. That's how I look at it, right? And I think as a politician or as an elected official, as Stacey Pfeffer Amato always says, she prefers to be called. I think that it's important to determine whataboutism from from actually identifying the things that are wasteful, right? So, people will say, well, what about Thrive NYC and all the waste that has happened there? What about, the Department of Homeless Services, which has never been run correctly since Bill de Blasio has been in office? What about the DDC, the design and construction, the Department of Buildings, HPD. I mean, you name an agency in this city, and there are very few that have been run properly. Part of the problem, I think, is that a lot of those appointments and a lot of the people that were given those jobs, and I talked about this with Catherine Garcia when I was interviewing her. She's running for mayor, about cronyism, about nepotism and putting people in place because they helped you run or they, funded your campaign. DOT, that just happened with DOT with Bill de Blasio. He appointed somebody who doesn't really have any transportation experience, but they're going to run the transportation agency. So as someone who would be in the city council, I totally respect and identify that you have this progressive agenda, right? But how can you make that work so that it's not just the police department or not just the fire department or not just, agencies that progressives have identified as wasteful, but all of the agencies? I mean, is oversight part of your plan?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you brought this up, because the three biggest roles of city council is oversight, New York City budget, and public land use. And guess what? I cannot wait to run hearings on the oversight of several departments, one of them being TLC. Our medallion crisis here in New York City is at its highest peak. I mean, I'm facing a housing crisis personally with my family because we had to file for bankruptcy in 2019. And so now we're looking at housing issues. It's really making sure we have oversight over NYCHA is the jurisdiction over the mayor majority, but making sure that all of these city agencies that are doing work and spending billions of dollars of tax dollars are now being brought to the table, and we're mandating data. DOE, Department of Education, we have old data. We have 2018 data that we are using to predict what children need in 2021. Why? As an educator, you best believe that is something I'm going to be asking the DOE, and why their data collection is taking so long when they collect it every day. They collect it every year. So this is really like about looking at city agencies, make sure that we're conducting oversight hearings and demanding that data is brought to us so that we can write legislation to make city agencies work and run better for the people. They don't run for the people right now, which is why it's so important to support candidates like myself who are not taking this money and allowing people to give me connections so then I have to owe them later. My work, my money, how I raised money on this campaign, the people who are involved in my campaign, the people who make decisions are people who live in this district and have never had the resources, have never felt seen before, and have never even donated to a campaign before. I'm the first for so many people in this district, for my own family. And so this is really a pinnacle process. And that's why it's really important, like, when going into city council, understanding that those are my three biggest roles. I can't promise people more than what I can and have the literal power to do. But will I work with state legislators to make sure that our MTA systems run better? for the people who live here? Absolutely. That we're building a climate resiliency plan that works for all of us? 100%. I have one on my website. So it's like, what are the things that we're going to do? What is the jurisdiction and the power that we have, and making sure our community understands that, and then using that power to bring good for our community and our district.
I think that one of the things that, and it's great to hear that, because, we don't often get people to admit that there are other agencies that need oversight. I mean, and it's frustrating, because I think that most people, especially in Rockaway, even though Rockaway gets a bad rap, and I think it does get a bad rap for being, difficult to deal with. I think that it's justified in a lot of ways, because Rockaway is usually either taken for granted or ignored by the mainland. And I think that's going to be a challenge for you, as someone who is running, who's from the mainland, that's running for office, where Rockaway is a big chunk of your district. It's funny, when I think about questions, whenever I'm thinking about questions that I'm going to ask candidates, you bring up such a great point with the TLC, the Taxi Limit Commission, because as someone who used to depend on taking cabs, I didn't drive until I was 35 years old, believe it or not. Now I couldn't even imagine not being able to drive. But
Yeah.
I depended on infrastructure. I depended on cabs. I depended on being able to get picked up after waiting tables for, 10 hours and having to get home and not trusting the subway, and having to take a taxi in the middle of the night. Certainly have depended on that. So let's delve a little bit deeper into that, because, some people have forgotten the what really is it. I mean, yes, we went through a pandemic, but there's an epidemic of people losing their, and people don't really understand. I understand, but I want you to explain to people why this is such a terrible situation with the folks that, are do own cabs and do drive taxis for a living.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, like I said before, this is such a personal story, because I'm a daughter of a taxi driver. This is the life that I've known. This is the life that I will know. And so when we talk about the medallion, I always start from ground zero. I always tell people, like, what is a medallion, right? Because you and I might know, but listeners might not. A medallion is a purchase of a small business. It's like a purchase of your ownership over a taxi.
Exactly.
And it is considered, and should be considered a little bit more widely, as a small business. And so my dad purchased his medallion in 1998 for $250,000. Did he have that money to pay up front? No. In fact, most immigrant drivers who are taxi drivers did not purchase their medallions with like cash up front. They actually had to take a loan. Now, we had Marblegate, Aspire, which are huge lenders, lend out all of these loans for purchasing of medallions. The creation of the medallion was supposed to be a cap of the amount of cars driving throughout Manhattan, because it was just too much congestion. What ended up happening was a mismanagement of this small business franchise, over lending to communities of color, to our immigrant communities, at $250,000 or sometimes $1 million, with incredibly high interest. And I'll give you a direct example. When my dad got his loan for 250, the interest was 12%. Now, just hearing that sounds insane. Our city allowed that to happen. So we allowed predatory lenders to lend people money for this franchise, and sold them the idea that here's your ticket to the middle class. By the time you're 66 years old, you'll be able to resell this medallion at millions of dollars and retire off of it. Now my dad's 66 years old, filed for bankruptcy, will be working for the rest of his life, and will never see retirement, and we're at risk of losing our home. This is before pandemic. Pre-pandemic, 950 medallion owners had to file for bankruptcy in New York City. And yet our city has yet to take responsibility for the predatory lending that they deregulated. Plus, with the influx of Uber and Lyft as companies, we had hundreds of cars on the road and not enough people taking taxi. And with the rideshare app, what that allowed for people to do was, the city allowed taxis and this corporation, Uber and Lyft, to drive around our community, our city, and literally have no sense of medallion. They didn't have to purchase anything to do that work, the corporation. How they treat their workers is absolutely terrible because they're not being considered as employees, and that's a whole nother conversation. But what has
Right.
happened to taxi drivers over time is ridership has dropped 80%. You have a TLC that is a city agency that has no oversight whatsoever, despite city council having reported about the negligence caused by our city. And AG Tish James just a month ago or a couple of weeks ago actually dropped the charges against the city because of this because of what no one knows really. And really what the city has been doing is centering hedge funds and lenders over people. We saw the mayor's plan most recently released where he's allocating $65 million to providing debt relief for taxi drivers. Really, it was a copy and paste from hedge fund plan, where lenders were being prioritized because they wanted to still be able to win with relief. And at the end of the day, this costs the city more money. New York Taxi Workers Alliance, which is a union that my father has been a part of my entire life, and I actually used to attend union meetings with him as an observer and someone who was just learning about this process since I'm the one navigating the system with my family. They've been fighting for debt relief for so long. They built a really, really sustainable plan where you would be able to restructure debt at $125,000. It would have caused a borrower, a taxi driver, to pay less than $800 a month over 20 years. That plan cost $75 million. Yet we just are talking about a $65 million plan. So again, we center corporations, we center lenders, we center banks, and we don't center people who need relief. And that is something that's really frustrating for people right now.
And I really think that part of the problem is that there's not enough people in government that have had real jobs, that have had to live real lives. And I've said this 1,000 times. I think that is what you talked about it before about listening. And I think there's too many people in government that don't listen, that they're too busy listening to their own voice. And someone who likes the sound of his own voice, who constantly is talking, I get it. You know what I'm saying? I get it. I get when you have an opinion and you really think it's the most important thing. But unless you listen and unless you glean things from other people who are walking in different shoes than you are, it's almost imperceptible to me how people can then legislate or vote on legislation without listening first, or without reading, a document, or without reading a law. And then after the fact, which we've seen with all of our elected officials here locally, oh, well, I didn't realize that was in the legislation, but yet you voted for it. So this is something that I think that people need to hear about, because yes, it's personal, and I'm sorry if I'm bringing it up and it's painful to talk about, but I do think that people have to understand. You just framed it, and I'm getting excited because you framed it perfectly. When people buy a medallion, they are purchasing a small business. So when we talk about the economic ruin that this pandemic has wrought, we're not just talking about mom and pop restaurants. We're not just talking about bodegas. We're not just talking about people who have lost their livelihood. We're talking about taxi drivers, because a lot of them who had to buy a medallion, that's a small business. I think that clarifies it and really certainly creates that understanding, so that when you talk about it, I think from now on, I didn't even think of that, to be honest with you. That terminology changes my perception of what taxi drivers are going through. And I think it's important to have that representation. And that's why running is almost as important as winning, because by running, you raise the issue with the other people that are running, who may not have even an inkling of what that is all about. One more question about small business.
Yeah.
Have you had any conversations with, like, for instance, the Queen's Chamber of Commerce, Tom Gresh and those folks, and have you done any outreach with them to try to get an understanding from business owners and what challenges they're facing, right now as you're running this campaign?
I haven't had a chance to talk to folks at the Queen's Chamber. I know who they are, and I've been so busy talking to small business owners who live in the district,
Right.
actually, throughout the entire district, starting from Woodhaven. And I want to just share a couple of stories to uplift these small businesses. Actually, Wendy from Whimsical Creations and Spa. She is a Latina woman who owns a small business, a small spa in Woodhaven, and she's done incredible work to build a business where women can walk in, or men, or just anyone can walk in and feel relaxed and really provide services that make people feel like they're in their home with their friends, just getting their nails done or their toes done or getting a massage or whatever it is that they need. And what was really sad to hear her say during this pandemic was that Con Edison, for example, still charged her $1,300 for electricity she didn't use during the pandemic, and threatened to shut down her business when she finally had the ability to open up, shut down her electricity if she didn't pay that bill. Those are the people that I'm thinking about here when I think about small business support. Why did that even happen in our city? That small businesses still had to pay for electricity and all of these utility costs when they weren't even able to open up, where we literally mandated businesses to close. Then I think about our folks here in the district, like the local press or Mis Empanadas on Cross Bay Boulevard, where they had no open space on the sidewalk to even build outdoor dining. Then I think about Low Tide Bar, who was outbidded for their location on the peninsula. This is a neighborhood small business run by people who live here, and because of money, weren't prioritized in the renewal of their business. These are the stories that I spend time thinking about and really planning for, because these are small business fees that our communities face when they can't even afford to stay open. This is about protecting workers who live at who work at these businesses as well, because if small business owners can't even keep their business open, how are they going to employ people? So, I mean, Queen's Chamber, whatever their powers are, could be really, I'm sure they have been advocating for small businesses. But in that time, I've been talking to small business owners and hearing their trials and tribulations throughout this entire process, pre and post pandemic. And the worries that they face every single day just to stay open. That's incredibly important for this district, because we're considered a transportation desert, this entire area. And so we depend so heavily on good businesses staying open. When they don't open, we lose out. The entire district loses out.
No, there's no question. Jobs are so important. And who provides those jobs? The small business owners provide the jobs, and if they're not being taken care of, then it's kind of hard for them to do their part and employ people locally. It's really important, and that's why I think that being willing to listen, to anyone, whether or not you think that they're a option to listen to. I always have those aha moments when I get a phone call and I'm like, oh God, I do not want to talk to this person, and then I wind up actually learning something or creating a foundation for something to happen down the road. So listening is an important skill. I think it's really important for an elected official. And I think that as you're running, I think this experience, regardless of the outcome, this experience will be valuable for you, because you'll have probably 4 or 5 or maybe even more perspectives that you didn't have, let's say, when you started to run. And I'm sure there's been a couple of those aha moments so far, and we still have, some time to go. If people want to learn more about your campaign, if people want to contribute, if people want to connect with you, how do they best go about that, Felicia?
Yeah, so you can check out our website at felicia2021.com. That's FELICIA 2021.com. You'll see all of our endorsements, latest news. You can sign up to volunteer. We really would appreciate having some volunteers on the ground or in phone banking with us. And you can also contribute on our website.
Well, look, I really want to thank you for spending some time with us today. I hope we get to talk again before the primary, and best of luck to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate you hearing my story, and to our listeners.